You've only got to look at what the top growers in terms of the spud growers or the veggie growers are doing here in New Zealand and also in Australia. They drip feed the nitrogen to those crops because they get better quality of crops and actually better quantity. So they hit all the markets, all the premium markets, so they get paid better. So it just goes hand in hand with being a better farmer.
This podcast is brought to you by GroundShift. If you're anything like me, you've probably realised that doing things the way they've always been done doesn't always lead to better outcomes on farm. And that's where GroundShift comes in. GroundShift is all about helping farmers rethink the way that they approach their soils, the inputs into their system, and improving their overall farm system performance. We focus on building resilience, improving efficiency, and ultimately creating more profitable farm systems. It's not always about throwing more into your system. Sometimes it's about understanding what's driving those results beneath the surface. So if you're serious about improving your farm's profitability and resilience, and utilising biology to drive your farm system performance, I highly recommend checking out groundshift.ag, and you can follow them online at groundshift.ag on Instagram. Welcome to another episode of From the Soil Up podcast. Today's special guest is Graeme from Fertigation New Zealand. I've wanted to record this podcast and this particular topic for some time because I feel like it's such a big opportunity for New Zealand farmers, particularly the irrigated flat sere or the plains here on Canterbury and dairy farming, to utilise this system to get better nutrient management for our dairy farms and also our cropping systems as well. So without further ado, let's get into it. Graeme, how are you today?
Yeah, good. Thanks, Conan. And thanks very much for the opportunity to be part of your podcast. I've watched a lot of your podcasts in the past, and there's always a gem or two to pick up. So hopefully the farmers can and the other people can pick up a gem or two out of what we're going to talk about today.
Oh, absolutely. Hopefully we'll break through a few myths that have been around fertigation and particularly pivots today. That's probably something that I'd really like to dig into and have a bit of a discussion around.
Good as gold. Let's get into it.
All right, Graeme, let's start there. First off, does fertigation corrode out irrigation infrastructure?
Definitely no, Conan. That is a big myth. And number one, it was tested in the Nebraska University 70s and again in the early 2000s, which shows it doesn't. And also the thousands of farmers across the states in America and Australia and New Zealand shows that no, there's no detrimental effect to the steel at all.
That's interesting. It's probably the most common response that I get from farmers is that it'll just corrode out my stuff quicker than it already would. But if they're already injecting, say, effluent, I'd imagine that would be more corrosive than, say, a low-rate nitrogen or fish product. Yeah,
it is, and it's all about the ratio effect. If you're putting on 100 litres of liquid urea through your pivot with 5 mils of water, that's 50,000 litres of water going on to that hectare. So you could drink the water, really. Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. So if I'm to compare them two head to head, so a farmer spreading, say, granular urea by truck versus someone using fertigation to put liquid urea on through their pivot, let's say, what are the key differences around nutrient efficiency? And then we'll look at loss as well.
Okay, so nutrient efficiency, because the urea has been applied as a liquid, therefore you get volatilization. There's not that granule sitting on the soil waiting for a bit of rain or for 10 mils of irrigation to wash it in. So there's not that increase in pH around that granule, which is where most of the volatilization actually occurs. So with fertigation, we're washing that nutrient straight into the root zone, and it's been picked up by the roots of the plant's roots.
That's interesting. So when we're using fertigation, is there a difference in how we apply it, say, whether we're trying to use it as a soil drench or sticking it to the plant? Does that change the way we utilise the system?
With fertigation, we really are doing it as a soil drench. As I said before, when you're applying 5 mils of water, that's 50,000 litres of water that's going on per hectare. If you're doing it as in terms of foliar application, through a spray truck, that you're using 200 litres of water. So with fertigation, it's always getting the nutrients into the root zone.
That's interesting. So before we get a bit more deeper into fertigation, can you give us a bit more of your background and introduce yourself, Graeme?
Yep, will do. So originally from Meraki, from a farming background over the last 30 years helping farmers. As a rural banker, and then moved into the fertiliser sales and have done everything in between. Been doing fertigation for the last 20 years. Started it back in 2002. I started the website.
So you've had a bit of a varied background. It's probably given you quite a complete look at how farm systems are actually work from both a financial but in a in the real sense. Do you apply that to the way you approach farmers and particularly fertigation?
Yeah, I do. It's got to stack up financially, Conan, as number one. If a farmer can get have a payback of the fertigation unit in 1 to 2 years, then it stacks up really well. There's an old saying that we use that if we can get fertiliser applied to 85% of his farm through fertigation for a good capital expenditure, then that's the ideal.
So Graeme, you've been working with fertigation for over 20 years now. What was it that got you interested right back, say, the early 2000s into fertigation?
I was working for a liquid fertiliser company, and a fellow called Graeme Munro was introducing fertigation to a few of his clients, and I was sort of taken under Graeme's wing and saw what he was doing, and those farmers having really, really good results by using fertigation, some through their K-line, some through the old rotor but a lot through their pivot. So that sort of got my interest. Some of the gear they were using in terms of pumps and stuff weren't that accurate. So I thought, there must be a better way of doing it, a bit more accurate. So I decided to start my own business.
That's interesting. So what does a setup practically look like for a farmer who might be considering it? I like to think about it as you're getting, say, an irrigation scheme water and it's all coming in through one source. Does that make it a lot easier to set up your system for fertigation?
So basically, a simple system would be a IBC of fertiliser sitting beside the pivot centre and with a fertigation pump delivering that into the pivot tower. So that's as simple as what it can be. We can have systems that have a fertigation shed that might have 3 or 4 pumps in it with a couple of large tanks outside that have got pipes that have gone out to different pivots. But yeah, again, the more complicated, the more costly. So we try to keep it simple. Yeah.
So you can kind of really tailor it to how complicated you want it to be in your own system.
Yeah, and a lot depends on what the irrigation system is, and what is the main line. Is it one ring main from the old rotor or is it a totally new design that was put in, say, 10 years ago?
Do the newer systems make it easier or harder to plug into?
Newer systems are actually easier to plug into. Often they'll have main lines that go directly to each pivot, whereas the old systems, sometimes they don't know where those main lines go to, so they don't know where the water's going to.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And do you need, I guess here in Canterbury, you'd need a backflow prevention device. Is that pretty common across all the systems across New Zealand? It
is indeed. So I was, when ECAN started to look at the fertigation and effluent injection, they came to Irrigation New Zealand, and I was one of the people that sort of wrote the handbook on chemigation and fertigation in terms of what they required, backflow preventer wise. If the farmer is already injecting effluent into his system, he'll have a backflow preventer or a chemigation valve already installed in the system, so it just becomes a no-brainer, really.
So when I guess most people think about a fertigation system, they probably think, something like viticulture or horticulture, where you kind of dripping it into there. What made you take it to the pastoral space? Well,
for a start, that's what we were doing back in the early 2000s, and then 2015 I went on a research trip to the States and saw what the farmers over there were doing it on large scale. Like every pivot over there has got some sort of fertigation tank or pump beside it, and to them they just said, "What, you farmers over there aren't doing it?" And they said, "No, we're not." And they go, "You're just idiots." So yeah, to them over there it's a no-brainer. Yeah,
it's that kind of whole thing around foliar nutrition in New Zealand. It seems like it's like there's this approach to it here, or this perception that it's not as good as putting granular on, and we just kind of ignore what they're doing overseas and just general good plant nutrition. So I think it kind of falls into that category of like, it's just easy enough to put the truck in, whereas you'd get probably better efficiency with your money and nutrients through a fertigation system.
You do, and you've only got to look at what the top growers in terms of the spud growers or the veggie growers are doing here in New Zealand and also in Australia. they drip feed the nitrogen to those crops because they get better quality of crops and actually better quantity. So they hit all the markets, all the premium markets, so they get paid better. So it just goes hand in hand with being a better farmer.
And this is one thing I talk about with my farmers when it comes to like pulling back nitrogen, even if it's in a granular form. Like putting on these big dollops, you get, your peaks and then your troughs. Whereas if, that little and often approach, you generally smooth out your whole pasture curve. Is that what you're finding with those that have transitioned to a fertigation approach?
Yes, it is, Conan. The number one, they don't have those peaks and troughs. It's a nice even curve, which they can manage a lot easier. And as one contract milker who's been using it for 5 years on a same farm said to me, he can see a response in 5 days. Just with using solid fertiliser, it'll be 10 days. Huge lot of feed that he goes, oh, heck, I don't actually need all that now, but with fertigation, he can just put on what he needs. And that's where the cost savings come from. It really is that simple.
Yeah, I've seen one of your systems on a dairy support farm, and he was growing more grass than the dairy farmers all on his road, and he reckoned that the next day you could see the grass growing after putting it on in the night. He was putting fish on as well, but was getting fantastic results and growing a huge amount of grass. So it's quite incredible, that response, this rate to it, and the evenness of the pasture coming out of it. And then I guess that flows through to better quality livestock as well, because they're not eating this high protein grass as well.
Exactly. Like when the dairy cow can't handle this protein of the grass at around 5%, she can handle 3%. That's ideal, and that's what grass grows well at as well. So we're just being better for the cows and better for the environment overall.
So when a farmer calls you, what are they usually trying to solve if they've got an interest in fertigation?
Good question. For a start, it's they've probably seen it somewhere working, and they want to know how they can get it onto their farm. It might be a cost-saving measure. It might be when the 190 NCAP come in, they were trying to work out how to go from 300 down to 190. Fertigation is one way of doing that. So we had a lot of interest around that. It might be that their fertiliser spreader has just decided to break and they've got to spend another $30,000 on a spreader. So they're looking at different options and spending that instead of spending that money on another spreader. It's going to rust out in 5 years or 10 years. So or it could be that they just want to change the way that they're doing things, and this is one of the options.
What I come across is I think people have an idea that the systems are a lot more expensive than they potentially are. So what sort of ballpark investment are farmers looking at for a standard system?
Good question. So the system that I described before, a pump beside the pivot centre, a pump would cost, say, $5,000. And if he needs a chemigation valve, that'd be another sort of $3,500, and a power point be another $1,000 with a transformer, etc. So around $10,000 would be for a simple system. The fertiliser can just be delivered in a IBC, so he doesn't have to worry about a bundled tank or anything like that.
And then the other end of the scale, if you're going to go to the big tanks and the shed, what are you looking at there?
You're looking at anywhere from $60,000 to $80,000. Yeah, but that'll cover 300 hectares easy. Yeah,
and potentially the return on investment there could be in the first season if you are working the system really well.
Yeah. So I just did some quick figures while I was waiting for the thing, and this first year savings would be for a 250 hectare farm would be $45,500 with savings and spreading and a 20% reduction in fertilisers cost. So it's a no-brainer, really, isn't it?
Yeah, well, you can probably almost by next spring maybe double those if the way things are going with the war overseas.
Exactly.
There's some savings to be made. Yeah. So walk us through how you utilise a fertigation system in, say, a dairy sense. Do people use it behind the cows or in front of the cows? Is there kind of like a standard approach, or people mixing it up?
New Zealand farmers have got their own opinion and own way of doing things, and I love them for that. So one farmer up at Swan and Ioway, they just apply 4 kilos of N per hectare every week, and that'll go on grazed pasture or post-grazing. So other farmers will put on 20 units of N in one hit, again, whether it's on grazed or ungrazed pasture. So yeah, everyone's different. Some people are putting on the fish and the seaweeds with their fertilizers. Others are putting it on separately. So yeah, it all depends on their own farm system, how they want to do it, whether the farm owner or farm manager is doing it, or whether they've got a 2IC that wants to be get involved in it. So yeah, we can design a system, and that's actually one of the factors that we consider when we're designing a system. Who's actually going to be using it? What safeguards do we need to put in place so that whoever's using it is going to get a 100% result every time?
And is there much difference in the way, like if you're seeing a cropping farmer or a sheep and beef guy, and he's got some irrigated flats where he's wanting to finish stock, do they kind of operate it quite variedly as well?
Yeah, they do. The cropping farmers will typically stick to their the crop plan that they have in terms of fertiliser timing. Yeah, put on nitrogen at T1 or T3. I've got other cropping farmers that have realised that if they put on a late application of nitrogen before just that flag leaf, that's actually beneficial for them as well. So sheep and beef farmers, it's like you just need to be refreshed.
So with nitrogen, timing is everything. So how does a fertigation system give farmer a bit more flexibility rather than waiting on a contractor or a weather window?
Yeah, so with fertigation, they've got all the equipment. They've got the spreader being the irrigator. They've got the fertiliser on hand, and they've got the pump. So all they've got to do is turn it on whenever they want. So there's no need to worry about when the contractors come. They can do it at night time. They can do it early in the morning, whenever. So as you see, Conan, timing is everything, especially in a crop situation as well. If they can get that nitrogen on at the right timing, and sometimes late application will be just ideal to increase the protein levels in that feed wheat or the milling wheat.
Do you have a bit of a rule of thumb around the way you recommend people utilise the system in terms of application?
Oh, it's sort of give them a few pointers, but it depends on how they want to run their system. It depends on who's going to be running it, who's managing it, and what they want to achieve out of it. Do they want to apply less nitrogen? Do they want to get better yields, better pasture growth? What's their actually key, their goals that they want to achieve by switching to fertigation?
If you switch to fertigation, does that mean you have to kind of chuck out your whole existing program, or can you work it alongside?
No, not at all. So they'll have their solid fertiliser program. They'll be putting a bit of P and a bit of K and sulphur and lime on. So they keep doing that. And this is just like the icing on the cake, really. Spread a bit of nitrogen when it's required, and from a sheep and beef perspective, and from a dairy perspective, put it on once a week instead of once a month. And they'll reap the benefits, really. So, they just got to stick to what they plan that they already know, they're already sticking to, and they can add a few trace elements to it, and they'll get huge benefits by doing that. And a few biological products like seaweed and fish, and away they go.
In terms of products, what's the main stuff that you're seeing is being utilised currently?
The main stuff is liquid urea from like Raven's Down or Balance or the Independence. Plus there's a lot of UAN going on. The UAN's often mixed with fulvic or humic acid and seaweeds or fish. So they're the main products. Plus, there's a sulfur product out there called ammonium thiosulfate, and then there's also a phosphate product, ammonium polyphosphate, which farmers are utilising as well. So horses for courses, whatever the farmer needs.
Are many of them trying to put biology through the system?
Yeah, they are, and they're getting really good results. The old soil biology loves to feed every day or every week, and the soil tells the benefits, shows the farmer the benefits. They are breeding better bacteria that the soil loves. The fungi levels increase, and it becomes an easier system to manage. Healthy soil, healthy crops, less insect and disease pressure.
Absolutely. So do you think the little and often for the soil biology is much better than saying like putting on a product, in spring and autumn? You're getting a better response from that little and often? Yeah,
we definitely are. And I think a couple of farmers that are putting the seaweed on, and he's growing as much grass as what the dairy farmers are up the road are. And that seaweed goes on once a week. And you just look at the worms and the biology in the soil, and you go, wow, It is really, really amazing.
Absolutely. Are they playing with anything which would be considered, I guess, less traditional farming, or are they still pretty traditional guys playing around with that seedweed?
He is really traditional. He's still putting on the superphosphates and the DAPs with his crops. And as I said, the icing on the cake's the seaweed. So to feed the biology. Yeah,
that's awesome.
Admittedly, he has cut back on the amount of phosphate that he has applied because his P levels keep on increasing, and the fertilizer companies don't know why. Yeah, so but we'll let them sort that out in another podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's probably something to do with the microbiology functions definitely happening there.
Yeah.
Are you seeing anyone who's actually tried to put the actual biology, like an EM product, through it as well?
Yeah, EM does go really, really well with it.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's
and there's a multitude of those products out there, but EM seems to be the one that you can put anywhere and you'll get a good result.
Awesome. Are people, when they're looking to shift this, are they also worried about the environmental impact of potentially their granular use? So obviously here in Canterbury, we've got a lot of pressure around nitrate leaching, and with that, we've got a lot of compliance on top to try and manage that impact. Do you see the fertigation as a bit of a solution rather than some of the other approaches out there?
Yeah, I do, Conan. And the main reason is that with all the other approaches, the poor farmer's got to either put something on his cows, they're going to buy another piece of equipment, he's got to adopt a different fertiliser regime, or he's got to put in some monitoring device to show how much he isn't leaching compared to what the overseer and stuff says he is. With fertigation, he's already got the spreading equipment being his pivot. He just needs to buy a pump and maybe a tank and learn how to utilise that equipment that he's already got. So, as we've discussed earlier in this podcast, if he can get a payback in a year's time, financially it's better, environmentally it's better, it ticks all the boxes.
Absolutely. And I mean, there's not many things you get a good return on in the first 12 months like that as well.
Exactly.
Yeah. In terms of the environmental stuff, I think one thing that's underrated here is around the volatilisation, and obviously we have had talks in the last few years around greenhouse gases. That's probably something that farmers weren't aware would going to be, taxed a little bit more for through their fur. Obviously with foliar, we don't get the similar amount of losses. Is that correct?
That is correct, and same with fertigation.
Yeah.
Because it's been washed into the soil, then there's no volatilisation of that urea granule on the soil surface. So I've been speaking to Ag Research about getting the fertigation being the big green tick from a farm environmental plan. So we're working on that as well. But the farmers that are doing it, they know that it's better for the environment, so that they'll just keep on doing it whether there's a green tick or a blue tick. Yeah.
It's an important point, because I think we talk about grading and what's good management here, but for me this is almost like that next step. It's kind of that A+ gold standard when it comes to the environment, but also nutrient management efficiency. And I think we're going to see a lot more pressure around that going forward, because that just seems to be where compliance and regulations seem to be going. Have you had anyone talk about it from, like, let's say milk supply companies or the meat companies be interested in it because they're hearing it coming down, the pressure coming down from their customers?
Yeah, so Synlait, start that again. Fertigation was one of the options that Synlait gave their suppliers to get the funding from Nestle. So there was quite a few farmers that were interested in putting fertigation on their dairy units. The sad thing that I think only two of them did because of the issues involved getting the money, but I would love it for likes of Alliance and Silverfern Farm to get them behind it, because the sheep and beef farms that are using fertigation, they're growing their lambs and steers out quicker to better weights, and they're hitting those premiums instead of marbling and all that sort of stuff, because the pasture that are eating is better quality. So it ticks all the boxes.
And I presume they're growing a lot more grass than what they might have been before, because, like you said, that little and often approach, creating that consistent pasture curve, which inherently can be a bit harder in a sheep and beef context.
Yeah, it can be. And like I was just talking to an old client of mine down in Paulburn, and he's been fertigating now for 10 years, and he's just got a simple system, small tank, puts in some urea, starts the pump up at 10 o'clock in the morning. It goes all night, turns it off at 9 o'clock in the morning the next day, and his daughter's taken over, and he says it's so simple, and I'm getting better wool weights, better lamb weights, better fertility, and he's just got 2 pivots covering 100 hectares. So, and his whole farm is 2,500 hectares. So a small area, irrigated well, fertilised well, makes a huge difference.
Well, it gives you so much more flexibility on the rest of the property, doesn't it? Because you're not trying to get all those stock to eat the grass when it's there and flush, and then you're battling away the rest of the season. You've actually got that flexibility later into the season too.
Yeah, you have. Yeah, that pasture autumn is gold, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of the economics around, I guess, your conventional truck turning up and using fertigation on, say, a pivot, what's kind of the difference there at a high level?
From a cost perspective?
Yeah, from a cost perspective.
Yeah, so an average dairy farm, if it costs $12 a hectare to get that fert spread, then on a 250 hectare farm, they're going to save about $20,000 a year. So it goes a long way to buying a pump and a tank and a bit of fert. Yep.
Yeah, that's year one if you've just got the simple setup done.
Exactly. Yeah. And we can go for gold in terms of year 2 and year 3. And then if they're saving 20% less, if they're saving 20% of their fertiliser bill, well, that's another 20 odd thousand. So these savings soon add up, Conan. So that 1 to 2 year payback, it certainly is achievable.
And do you see, in terms of grass grown, the return on investment is better with fertigation in terms of how much grass you're growing from the amount of kgs of nitrogen?
Yeah, so we've just finished a trial up at Hororata where we grew another 23% some months compared to the control pivot. That was in December, January and February. And if we relate that back to the Irrigation New Zealand trial that we did back in 2019, 2020, we grew more dry matter. It's about 10% more dry matter than the control over the period from October through to December. And then we didn't actually apply any nitrogen through December, February, and applied it in March and April. So, we grew 10% more with a lot less cost. And so that was Lincoln University trial. So
cool. So there's actually plenty of studies here in New Zealand, because a lot of people will say, oh, that's overseas studies, it doesn't work here. So you've actually done a fair bit of local work with this.
Yeah, we have.
Yeah. If someone wants to check those out, are they on your website, or where can they find those? Yeah,
they can go to the fertigation.co.nz website.
Cool.
Or they can give me a call and have a chat about it. Yeah, and but there's oodles of information both here, Australia or America, on the benefits of fertigation.
Absolutely. So we've got things at the moment are obviously prices are going up across the board because of what's happening in the war overseas in the Strait of Hormuz. How can people, is there a way to trial the system and see if it works for their setup, or is it kind of you jump in full hog?
No, look, they'll have a pivot that's nice and handy to the yard or to a road. They can just start with that pivot. It might be 50, 60 hectares. Put a power point in there. Buy a pump. As I said before, it's $5,000, and try it. We're happy to go and do some pasture cuts and compare that to what the pivot next door is doing. Yeah, and they'll see the difference. Within a couple of months, they'll see a difference.
Yeah. And what sort of rates are you injecting the actual fertiliser in at, say, just a standard pivot?
Yep. So if they're putting on, say, 4 kilos a week, then that's of liquid urea at 20%. So that's 80 litres of product a hectare. So if they're covering 50 hectares, that's 4,000 litres of product. So we're normally injecting that over a 24-hour period, so just to keep it simple. So they'll be injecting around 160 odd litres an hour into that pivot.
Yeah, that's pretty easy. Do you find the pivots are a lot easier to work with the system, or does it work through rotor-rainers simply too?
It just works. It works through anything that applies water to ground.
Yeah,
we can get a fertigation system set up to work it. Where the water goes, the fertilizer will go. Yeah. Yeah.
No, that's awesome. So it makes a lot of sense on the in the dairy where they've got, just mainly pasture. Are you seeing quite a bit of interest in the sheep and beef for those guys that might be quite extensive, like you described before, but have some finishing land?
Yeah, one of my good clients down at Omakau, he's got 5 pivots now that he's put up over the last 10 years. And each one of those has got fertigation on it. Some of those he utilises just for growing winter feed crops. And he's won a couple of winter feed competitions using fertigation. Some of the other pivots are just planted in really good pastures, with good red, white clovers, chicories, and good fattening tucker. And he uses fertigation over that. He puts a bit of seaweed and fish over those crops, because he knows that there's plenty of nitrogen fixation happening with the clover. So he's just supporting the clover with a few trace elements and a bit of biology.
Well, that was going to be my question, is how much nitrogen would he be using in a system like that? But it sounds like not too much on the pasture.
Much, really. Yeah, just a bit at the start, and maybe a bit end of April, just to get the soil biology going for a wee bit longer.
Yeah. And then in terms of the winter feed, is he just putting nitrogen through for them as well?
No, he's putting a bit of like EM on there as well. The nitrogen, he will be doing herbicide sampling and seeing what the crop actually requires. It might require a hit of 20 kilos and that he'll apply over a month, and other times it might only be 5 kilos it needs. So he just picks and chooses, and depending on what the crop needs. Yeah. He'll also be putting on the likes of fish to keep the insects away, and it might be a bit of cobalt or a bit of molly just to make sure that the nitrogen he is applying is actually being utilised by the plant.
So he's utilising the fish as almost an insect deterrent?
Yes, he is.
Yeah. And that obviously will feed the microbiology, which will make the plant healthier at the same time. So you're getting a bit of a double whammy there.
Indeed, he is. Yeah, like we know that insects only go into crops that are giving off the right wavelengths or whatever, because they've got too much nitrate in the plant and the leaf. So if the plants are being fed little and often, they don't have that issue. Insects don't become a problem.
That's a very big can of worms to open there around the vibration of plants. I like to think of white butterfly as a garbage collector. So if you see it on your crop's not healthy and it's just trying to collect that garbage, and we need to figure out how to make that plant healthy through nutrition. So then the disease pressure disappears. But that might be another conversation for another day. So when we talk about, integrating into fertigation into a farm system, have you ever kind of come across a place where it doesn't really fit, or a context that's not really, it doesn't work well? Yeah,
there's been a couple of times. One particular farm had a couple of creeks running through the centre of the farm where the pivot went over. So they weren't going to be putting variable rate irrigation on those pivots. So I said it doesn't fit here from an environmental perspective. Another one was the irrigation system actually needed a really good clean up and tidy up in terms of, nozzles being off the machine, leaks all over the machine. The pressure was wrong at the pump shed, so therefore the DU distribution uniformity would have been all over the place. So I said, spend the money on the irrigation system, get that up and running right, and then we'll look at fertigation. Yeah,
that's good. Have they taken on your advice and fixed up the irrigation, or is it a work in progress?
Yeah, that was probably 4 or 5 years ago, so I haven't actually been back there. Yeah. Well, I should actually go back and have a look. Yeah,
absolutely.
I think with their farm environmental plan would have made them do that sort of thing.
Yeah, definitely. So we've talked a little bit about it, but in terms of, there's more of a focus on soil health and function nowadays, and everyone's kind of talking about it. And, there's a talk about regenerative farming as well in New Zealand, even though it's kind of a taboo word in New Zealand farming for some reason. Do you think fertigation actually is a system that integrates well into kind of those contexts too?
Yeah, yes, it does, Conan. Very, very much so. Like, we've been talking about soil biology, feeding the microbes, bacteria and fungi, and so it fits into that regen or system really, really well. Yeah, it really does. We just focus in healthy soil, it gives healthy plants, give healthy animals. So let's work on the soil, and fertigation is a no-brainer to being able to feed that soil little and often.
So you've been probably having these conversations for over 20 years. Have you seen that conversation shift at all, or is it still relatively the same people talking about it?
Yeah, that's a good question. If I look at some of the farmers that started back 20 years ago, because what they're doing works for them, therefore there's no reason for them to change. What happens is that there's two examples I can think of where the father started with fertigation, the son came along 10 years later, saw what the benefits of it were, and decided to try other products that he could go through it. So it starts them off on the right track in terms of being more of an environmental steward than just as a farmer. So that's the way I like to think about it. Actually, one of those farmers that I was just thinking of, they're down at near the Lindis Pass, and they're doing really, really well with it. Yeah. Yeah.
So in terms of those, like in dairy, I see more people going to injecting their effluent into the system. Does that make it a lot easier just to plug like a fertigation system into the back of that, or is it the same sort of mechanism?
It is and it isn't. So the main benefit, if they're already injecting the effluent into the irrigation system, is that they'll have their backflow preventers already installed, and they will be signed off. So that's a big plus. They don't have that extra $3,000 to $5,000 to install one of those. But they do need a different type of pump, a dosing pump, rather than a rotary pump or that they use to inject the effluent in. With the effluent, they'll be putting in 4 to 5 litres a second compared to the fertigation, which we're doing 150 litres an hour. So, we go from a large pump to quite a small pump, really.
So I generally finish up all my podcasts with a quick fire question for all, and this one is around what's one belief or principle that's kept you grounded no matter what season of life you're in?
I think that it would be, if you do the right thing for the right people at the right time, they'll get a good result.
I like that. So if someone's wanting to connect with you, Graeme, and learn a bit more about fertigation or see how it can apply to their farm, or whether it applies to their farm, what's the best way to connect with you?
Just give us a call on my good old cell phone, 0276 246 750, or email me admin@fertigation.co.nz, or look up the website fertigation.co.nz and give us a bell. That's
Sounds
great.
good. I'll chuck the link below. But thank you very much for your time today, Graeme. It's been great chatting about fertigation. It's something I think has great value, particularly in our pastoral systems here. And hopefully we've cleared up a few things there around how the system works.
No, thanks very much, Conan. I really do appreciate your time and the effort, and look forward to talking to you again soon.
Sounds good.
Lovely.